Hear me, demigods, my children beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god.
And then she said the ancient phrase.
But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
Alright, welcome back to 100 Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to do a little bit more of a rambly rant style video, but this time on the schemes of Queen Marika. So I won't spend too much time retreading old ground. I mean, we all know who Queen Marika is. She's of the Newman race, or as the Hornsent call them, the shaman. They're said to be the descendants of people from another world, and that they're rarely born and long-lived. And back when the Hornsent were in charge, they discovered that the shaman had this unique property to them that when you cut them up, their flesh, it actually is like a bit of glue, sort of. It melds really well with the flesh of other people. And then the Hornsent, they had this bright idea to stuff them all in these jars and use this jar magic to turn them into the first living jars. This eventually got out of hand to the point where the Hornsent would, well, for lack of a better term, genocide most of the shaman population, at least in the lands that would become known as the Shadowland. Now, they didn't get all the Newman, obviously. Marika herself would escape and become a god. She would transcend into a higher form of existence. And several other Newman women with close ties to Marika herself were said to have been spared the horrors of the jar, but a huge portion of their race was gone now. And Marika essentially took drastic measures to ensure that that wouldn't happen again. Now, we don't exactly know the specifics of how Marika overthrew the Hornsent. I mean, we know she has a habit of using seduction and clandestine operations. She had a clear-cut motto of, if you can't beat him, then seduce him. A good early example of this would be the Giants of the Mountaintops. Now, it isn't really mentioned much, but they were a pretty big deal, a huge threat. They drove the ice dragons from the mountaintops just so that they could settle them, so I don't think that they were going to back down from Marika's challenge. Really, they were nothing to laugh at. They had the numbers, strength, and fire on their side, so what she did was she tipped the balance, seducing the lesser giants, known as the trolls, to her cause, as well as the Zamor knights, who had this age-old hatred for the fire giants, and she brought them all over under her umbrella. Look how effective that was. I mean, it played out perfectly for her. Pretty much an extermination of the greater giant race. The only one left is one that she kept around because she figured she might have use of his fire one day. I think another great example would be the conflict with Caria, where as Radagon, she couldn't quite break the Carian lords and their leader and the might of the Academy. Twice she invaded, and twice she was fought to a stalemate, again as Radagon. Now, the second of these stalemates also ended in the unification of the houses of Caria and the Erdtree in the form of a marriage between Radagon and Renala. Muriel the Turtle can tell you all about it. He's basically the George R.R. Martin of Elden Ring. And if you need any proof of that, just type in George R.R. Martin Turtle, and you'll see that that's basically like his personal sigil. Anyway, it's not hard to believe that a young Marika, after seeing her people brutalized to be made into saints since their flesh melded really well with others, could have enacted some sort of plot that involved seducing an important Hornsent to overthrow their entire race, to become God. Just ask Granny Hornsent. She views Marika as a quote-unquote strumpet, and I think it's entirely possible that it was this sweet old lady's son that may have in fact been seduced by the future Queen Eternal. All in order to advance her scheme of vengeance that ultimately paid off in the long run. This is all just speculation, of course, so as always, let me know your takes in the comments. And speaking of which, the statues of her in the Shadow Realm could tell an interesting story as well. Were they erected after Mesmer's crusade or before? Now, yes, the heads of all these statues have been removed, of course, but was this in response to Mesmer's atrocities on Marika's orders, or was it something else? Could Marika be hated for another reason? One that perhaps predates these crusades? I mean, why else would the heads have been removed? Could it have been Marika's possible seduction and betrayal of the Hornsent people for what they'd done to her village and kinsmen? I mean, I think it's possible. This is, of course, assuming that the shaman people were being put in jars before Marika betrayed the horn scent, since the whole Saint Jar initiative is believed to be her primary motivator in all of these massive transgressions she's made against the horn scent people as a whole, and later her attitudes towards the omen. To me, it does make the most sense, but maybe it's more complicated than that, because remember, they talk of Marika betraying them, and we assume them to be leaving out the fact that they had butchered her people, and that's what led to her actions against them, but there arises a few other possibilities from all this. So option A, they don't view what they did to Marika's people as wrong or horrific. They were turning them into saints after all. That's how the Hornsent saw it. And you got to remember how brutal the Hornsent religion and its gods were. Look at the Cursed Blades or the Tree Shaman and anybody born with Tanglehorns. It really didn't do you any favors to be blessed by the Horn God. Now there's also option B. The butchering of the Newman/shaman people happened after Marika's betrayal, but before she returned with Mesmer and his unending purge of the Hornsent. And of course, last but not least, option C, probably the most popular. Marika began working her way up the chain of Hornsent, and while in the process of this, she learned of what was happening to the Newman and became vengeful. She then decided to betray them for it, and the rest was history. She became God, and pretty much stamped the Hornsent almost entirely out of existence. And sure, there's probably other possibilities too, but we'd probably be here all day, and I've still got this whole video to go, so let's move on to Marika's famous conquest. So she started by slaying the giants, the biggest and strongest of all the races in the lands between. But she didn't stop there. After Marika, her husband Godfrey, and their combined forces of Zamor warriors and the legions of the capital, they completely annihilated the fire giant race to the last man. There's only one fire giant left. She also turned the fire giants' lesser cousins, the trolls, against them as well, so they were really fucked in this situation. But anyway, she turned the last fire giant into a prison of sorts for their fell eldritch god, either because she didn't have the ability to destroy this fire god, or perhaps that she knew she would need its fire again later at some point. And she obviously didn't stop there. She had to put down a couple rebellions in her time. There was one led by the Glowmide Queen, who commanded this horde of Godskin apostles. And after she had her shadow brother Malekith deal with this, she decided that she would seal away death in Farum Azula, make everybody have eternal life. Now, again, this could be all a part of her plan, or this could have just been a knee-jerk reaction. Anyway, I think the last thing Marika did before officially starting the Golden Order and becoming a god was probably her coolest. And it wasn't anything complex or complicated, really. All it was sending her most twisted, darkest, Daemon Targaryen-esque son, Mesmer the Impaler, to go do what he does best: impale. Impale, burn, destroy the Hornsent, and extract revenge from them for what they did to Marika's people. And let's not forget, the Hornsent, yeah, they weren't no saints, but they weren't exclusively just fucking Marika's people over. They were pretty fucked to their own people as well, and regular humans. Marika just kind of took it personally. And this was all possible because Marika did something weird at the Gates of Divinity. It seems like she stole the vision or something, the sight, the gold, or something from possibly Metyr, the Mother of Fingers, in that trailer for the DLC. But we're not going to get into all that here. We're going to mainly talk about her scheme and her involvement with the Knight of Black Knives and what her endgame was. So let's fast forward a little bit. Marika becomes a god, and then she immediately begins her scheme to free herself from the Greater Will and this sort of other part of her persona that embodies order, known as Radagon, since he's basically the Greater Will's #1 fan. A lot of good that does him in the end, though. The embodiment of the Greater Will just straight up turns him into a weapon, turns him into a sword. Anyway, though, to escape this eldritch entity known as the Greater Will, Marika began her schemes almost immediately. She sent her husband Godfrey away, outside of the lands between, and more importantly, outside of the sphere of influence of the Greater Will. She sent him back home to the Badlands to live and die alongside his kinsmen and his followers, his crew, the Tarnished, as they would come to be known. And she promised him that one day, after they've grown strong from living and dying in these endless conflicts out in the Badlands, that their grace would be restored to them and that they could come home to the lands between and serve her once again, or Godfrey could reclaim his rightful place as her husband. This was essentially America keeping an army of powerful warriors in reserve, out of sight and out of mind from anybody who could catch on to her schemes, and most importantly, like I said, the greater will and its many spies and eyes. I mean, it's no surprise America was paranoid by this point already. The curse of the omen had already taken 2 of her sons, not to death or anything, but out of the public eye and, into the sewers. I think it was at this point that Marika realized that the pantheon of old gods she pissed off were going to attempt to strike back at her in any way they could. In this case, the vengeance of the horn scent was personified into what I believe is the omen curse, and it sort of just, in no small way keeps the horn scent race alive by producing these omens, who are then shunned and turned into slave soldiers or are hunted down. The babies, of course, have their horns sliced off rather violently and put onto these omen cleavers for the omen killers to use. But you guys are all familiar with that, just another bad story, right, Hawk? Anyway, America had some more kids until something very concerning happened. A few of these kids, mainly the ones who happened to have Radagon as their father, turned out to be Empyreans that could, quote-unquote, succeed her. Now, obviously, there were exceptions like Ricky and Radon, who were the offspring of Radagon and weren't Empyreans. But it's interesting that this part of her that she'd rather be rid of just so happens to create her replacement for her, How could she not see the writing on the wall? They were attempting to push her out, and that's something that just wouldn't stand for her. Radagon himself is seemingly just the Golden Order's lackey that happens to reside within Marika, and have this sort of consciousness of his own, a consciousness that is just completely loyal to the greater will as its lapdog. And I think Marika probably felt like she'd be damned if she was going to be going out like this. I mean, she was the Eternal, and to be eternal meant she was damn well going to survive this and maintain power. And maybe that's why she decided she needed to gain freedom from the greater will. So she stages this whole elaborate conspiracy to, I think, get the Elden Beast killed, and Radagon, since it just, turned him into a weapon. I think that's what this was all about, if nothing else. It was, about destroying the Elden Beast and getting rid of Radagon once and for all. And, in order to accomplish all of that, she knew that the children and the stepchildren had to go. They were worthy sacrifices, as she probably saw it. It was nothing personal, really. This was about self-preservation and maintaining power, as far as I can tell. And again, of course, achieving freedom from Radagon and the Elden Beast. One thing I've learned in this doing this research on Marika is that she's quite unapologetic about her actions and why she did them. It's almost as if she prefers to be known as this treacherous, scary, someone you don't want to cross. I mean, if she couldn't beat you in a fight, she would find a way to seduce you and steal all of your power and make you enthralled to her. I mean, shit, think about it. She seduced the lesser giants to her side, turning them against their much larger, older cousins. And, then what'd she do? Enslaved a good number of them after they were no longer needed in the war effort. Although, to tell the truth, I think those trolls, the lesser giants, are willingly serving Marika in that capacity. They're just sort of... And sure, a good number of them have their own autonomy and are just kind of doing their own thing across the lands between, but the ones that have to pull the carriages, that seems like a pretty painful way to be hooked up to a cart, is all I'm saying. But shit, maybe the trolls are into that. Maybe they really wanted to be free from the fell god that Marika didn't even really have to do much seducing. I've always liked the trolls, but moving on. And again, as far as concern for her own children goes, she locked her son Mesmer behind a veil of shadow and set him upon the horn scent like a mad dog, and it turned out he was actually quite methodical and calculating about his slaughter. She only returned to that area one time, and it was to bathe her hometown in a healing light and sort of just lock it away from the rest of the Shadow Realm. Who knows why she did this, considering that no one was currently living in it anymore, and most of the shamans were either escaped to other parts of the lands between or were cut up by a nasty rotten tooth whip and stuffed into what would become known as the living jars, although at the time I believe they were called saint jars. Now, I do think it's sort of unclear the exact directive that Marika had given Mesmer other than to just eradicate the horn scent and burn their idols, because he slew the great beast, impaled the horn scent's most revered warriors, known as the Sculpted Keepers, who partook in the lion dance. And Mesmer didn't stop there, though. He also burned the Church of the Bud, which was one of the oldest religions in the land of the Horn Scent. It had a lot to do with their spirals, and then, a spiral tree and then two buds coming out of the top. Something that looks a little bit like the thing that Melania left behind in the Aeonian swamp in Caelid after she bloomed. So yeah, Mesmer burned this church, unknowingly causing the literal creation of the Scarlet Rot. I mean, talk about bad luck. It's not exactly Mesmer's fault, though. We have to put that one on Marika, considering she's the one who probably ordered him to do it. But I'm sort of getting off track here again. Anyway, Marika seemingly came to the conclusion that at the very least her Empyrean children would have to be dealt with. The others would become willing sacrifices whether they realized it or not. But the three Empyreans clearly posed a pretty big threat to Marika's plans. And that's where we get to the Night of Black Knives, which I believe Marika herself orchestrated and used Ranni as a pawn. But Ranni also had her own ulterior motives, who may have been actually using Marika as well. They used each other. But first, let's talk a little bit about the Black Knife Assassins, since this originally was going to be a video entirely about them. What little info we're given about them right off the bat seems a bit contradictory. I mean, it's said that they're scions of the Eternal Cities, but it's also said that they were women who were close or who had close ties with Marika herself. Now, again, on the surface, it appears that Marika would be at odds with the Nox in the Eternal Cities, but Marika, she calls herself Eternal, and the Nox ever really are described as invoking the ire of the Greater Will, not necessarily the Queen herself. In fact, Marika is a bit at odds with the Greater Will, so it could be that she conspired with the Nox at some point to overthrow the Greater Will, but they got caught and she sort of used them as a scapegoat to take the full blame and punishment. Hence the natural-born Star of the Void showing up to level one of their cities. So if we combine the two conflicting origins of them being, of the Eternal Cities and also being women with close ties to Queen Marika, it's possible that Marika may have created these women with silver tears, or perhaps the Nox created them to emulate Marika. See, they were on a quest to replicate their lord as well, but perhaps they'd already succeeded in replicating the goddess Marika in some small way. Maybe Marika found out about these copies and took them for herself, at which point she utilized them as her own personal assassins who were disguised as her handmaids. This could explain them both being described as Numen women and also scions of the Eternal City. One thing I've learned about the Nox is that they seem to have been at least somewhat obsessed with replicating the successes of gold, gods, lords, goddesses, with their own versions in the form of silver. We see time and time again their various attempts to replicate dragons or lords in the form of the Dragonkin soldier of Noxtella. We see the lightning-infused silver tears. So perhaps the Nox tried to use their science to replicate Numen, or perhaps even Marika herself, and instead created these copies who, they look like Marika, sound like Marika, but there's something off about it. Maybe they're gray-skinned because they're actually mimic tears. Yeah, I know in-game they bleed red blood, but so does Loretta and Gaius, who I believe both are albinoric, so it could just be, a gameplay thing. I think the Nox also bleed red, which I always thought they were supposed to bleed silver too, but who knows. I think it could just be a gameplay thing, or I could be wrong, but let's move on with my theory nonetheless. I like to look at this all in my own way.
What do you mean by that? Not necessarily the way they happened.
Now, of course, that's not definitive, it's just, speculation, but I think it could explain possibly why we're not able to see what they look like. They're invisible, if you will. We can only see their armor and their hood. It'd be interesting if they were actually just these really weird, imperfect copies of Marika from the Nox, who Marika just repurposed and taught the fighting style of Melina, who they fight exactly like, for the sole purpose of using them in a plot like the Night of Black Knives. Now, I really like how she also gave them like these blue hoods and like blue cloth and capes to wear on their armor, because it sort of indirectly implicates the Carians, and Ranni was in fact involved with the plot. So Marika did have it set up in a way where none of the blame would fall upon her, and she could just simply play the grieving mother card. That is, if she had feelings, of course. And obviously Ranni was only involved because it suited her own ends too of freeing herself from her Empyrean flesh. But I really like to think Marika didn't really care what Ranni's ulterior motives. She probably knew she had some reason for signing up for this. But I also think Marika planned to betray Ranni and maybe even have the Black Knife Assassins do the killing of her. But maybe Ranni beat them to it and just carved herself up in front of them, which sort of just made them not investigate the situation further. They just figured, okay, she's gone. They didn't realize that, for some reason at the exact same time that the other assassins were killing Godwin, which resulted in Ranni becoming this sort of unkillable spirit ghost thing. Now, Marika may have even accounted for this variable because she seemingly ordered the Black Knives to monitor the activities of Ranni's closest conspirators and buddies. The Knives seemed to know that she managed to cheat death, but perhaps because she'd slain her Empyrean flesh, they no longer were really concerned about her because she didn't pose a threat to Marika anymore, as far as they knew. Turns out Ranni did have her own, plans and goals in mind, where she was going to take over the world with the help of the moon, but that's a story for another day and one that I may or may not have already covered. So I believe Ranni was obviously betrayed by Marika, but Ranni didn't really care too much because she got what she wanted out of that whole thing, and it eliminated a vast number of other problems that could have arisen for Ranni to have to deal with. So she just simply went into hiding with her conspirators and sort of continued her own plans and schemes to overthrow the current world order, which she may or may not do with the players' help. Marika, or at the very least the Black Knife Assassins, weren't as convinced that Ranni wasn't going to be a problem, presumably because they were watching her conspirators when Ranni ran off with the Fingerslayer blade and chose then to attack. We all know how that went down. Iji was either slain by the assassins using a black flame, or he, killed the assassins and burned himself with the black flame, which, either one is a valid interpretation. He wore that mirror mask to protect himself from the Greater Will, but it turns out it wasn't actually the Greater Will that would have come knocking. It was actually Marika and her henchmen. And as we know, Blythe survived his encounter with the assassins effortlessly, but he seemingly suffered some sort of software malfunction and went berserk. And it ends up falling on the player to actually have to put him down, whether he was your ally or not. Now, previously I'd always thought that these guys were targeted simply because they knew that Ranni was trying to make her own, world order. Maybe Marika suspected that that's what Ranni was up to, and she had her assassins watch her and her conspirators just to make sure that they weren't doing it. And when they had evidence that that was what she was doing, that's when they struck at her conspirators. But, that is a valid interpretation, but I think it might have other possibilities, like there might be other reasons why these guys were targeted. I was thinking that it's entirely possible that Ranni's homeboys may have simply been targeted for being Carrions. Following the Night of Black Knives, the Carrions imprisoned the ringleader of the assassins inside Neverjill, and her daughter was also slain by them trying to protect her, but was secretly given the honor of being turned into Spirit Ash by, I assume, Marika, or someone who was authorized by Marika. Anyway, the leader, Electo, still remains imprisoned in a hidden Everjail on the Moonlight Plateau, which is pretty hard to reach without a lot of legwork and know-how. Anyway, there weren't a whole lot of Carrions left outside of Ranni and company and, and Renala, of course, so the assassins sort of just had to take what they could get, in terms of recipients for their revenge. Perhaps Iji and Blythe were only attacked after Ranni left because it was precisely her influence that had protected her friends previously from the eyes of the assassins in the first place, and, once she was gone, so was the protection. I think it's definitely a possibility. So, these Black Knife Assassins, they were slippery, and Royal Omen Morgott, misguided fool that he was, invented a sentry torch, which was a way to dispel the shadow veils that the Black Knife Assassins used. This basically ensured that another night of Black Knives was all but impossible. So I think that clears up any confusion as to whether or not Morgott knew that Marika was involved with the plot. And that certainly makes things interesting because some Black Knife Assassins sort of just openly remain in the capital. Perhaps they're still serving Marika in some regard. But most of the rest of the assassins scattered across the lands following their righteous bout of godslaying. Some apparently are searching for the other half of the Rune of Death, according to some, that is. I personally believe that at least a few of them are searching for their former leader, Electo, who was taken from them. The only problem is that they seem to have an extremely difficult time figuring out how to get to the Moonlight Plateau above the Albinoric village. You can find some of these assassins still hiding out in catacombs or old chapels and stuff like that. There's also a few that got stranded inside the Ordina Evergel, where they still remain today after failing to reach the Halig Tree. There's actually one dead one here who was either killed by Albinoric archers or perhaps by Cleanrot Knight Finley when she had to drag Melania presumably through this Evergel to open up the door to the Halig Tree. Now, there's one last thing about the Black Knife Assassins that I found interesting but couldn't really find much of a connection on, is that there seems to be some small association between the Black Knife Assassins and the Godskins, or at least there just is open similarities, maybe no real connection. It made me start thinking that perhaps some of those Newman women who became the Black Knife Assassins had some sort of connection to the Glomite Queen and her inhuman children. I mean, they have one thing in common, that's for sure: God killing. The Apostles fight a bit like Black Knife Assassins, and when E.G. is killed, we see that he was killed with a black flame, and that's only really used by the Godskins and the people who follow him. There's also that one Godskin noble that's sort of guarding Ranni's remains, or, jury's still out on what exactly he's doing there, but it's something that I'll definitely continue researching. But let's get back to the video. Sorry about that abrupt trail off. We do that a lot here. So anyway, let's now move on to some of the aftermath Fallout style events that happened after the Night of Black Knives. I think the biggest one would probably be the mutating of Godwyn. So who knew that Marika's sealing of the Rune of Death at the beginning of her Golden Order would lead to these rather unfortunate consequences in the wake of the Night of Black Knives? Death had been brought back to the Lands Between in the most bizarrest of ways. Deathroot, this weird Deathroot, I guess would be the best way to describe it. It was born from the putrid remains of Godwyn the Golden. His soul was dead, but his body became undead. And now, I don't think Marika accounted for this, but at the same time, I don't think it was much of a threat to her at all. It was something that she could easily fix when she was God for eternity again, and seemingly paid it all no mind. Which is exactly why the Tibia Mariners were able to become like leadership roles within the undead hierarchy, and like Fia became their god, or at least their patron saint. It's a whole thing that I should probably get into in another video. There's always the possibility that Marika simply just didn't account for the whole mutation of Godwyn. She had to figure death would find its way to creep back into her order somehow. Personally, I've always figured that she just simply paid it no mind because she could just simply fix it when the order restarted. I mean, that's kind of how she acted. She paid the long-term effects of the spread of the Deathroot little to no mind, and the measures in place to deal with it were not given the resources to properly be effective in combating its massive infestation of the roots of the Great Tree that the Erd Tree itself had sort of just taken over, and before anybody knew it, there was undead in every catacomb in the Lands Between, and every graveyard, all because Marika decided that there was no place for death in her order. Now, sure, this could have been a part of Marika's plan, but I don't see how it benefits her. Or maybe this is just the price she had to pay for being able to control death in the way she had for all these eons, sealing it away, only allowing it out when she decides it's necessary through these secret plots. Now, I think there's also a big possibility that Marika is incapable of doing anything about Godwyn's infestation, at least currently. Godwyn's corpse isn't really something that's killed easily either. They basically tried everything to put his mindless undead remains to rest, but even the best efforts of individuals like Mikola and the powerful ancient dragon Fortisax were, well, suffice it to say, not enough. Maybe Marika caused irreparable damage by sealing away the Rune of Death. Maybe the only true way to fix quote-unquote the undead problem is through the Age of the Duskborn ending. But again, speculation for another day. And I also want to go on record and say that I don't believe Marika could easily fix this mess. Although I do think that perhaps restarting a new era with a new lord and her being a new goddess again could possibly allow her the abilities to sort of just sweep all this under the rug. Obviously, pure speculation. Anyway, as far as the current state of the lands between went, the rest of the world was going to have to deal with the nasty side effects of this plague. The rune of death was now spreading through the lands between, fragmenting and essentially just spreading the plague of undead across the land. Not unlike in Dark Souls, where it became a problem for the people there and the gods. Speaking of this whole death blight plague and its unintended or maybe intended consequences, Marika didn't really care much for her dog brother Malekith, judging by how she used and abused him, then essentially tossed the poor mutt aside and abandoned him. I mean, come on, that's what's called animal abuse. I mean, shit, at this point I probably shouldn't be surprised. Marika had very little humanity left in her. It's kind of a big part of the whole being a god thing. I mean, just listen to how Saint Trina puts it. But how Marika did Malekith was downright cruel. A case of divine animal cruelty, if you will. First, she allowed Ranni to conspire with her brother Rykard to steal the Rune of Death from under Malekith's nose. Then all the blame for its theft was placed squarely on this loyal dog's shoulders, and as his grand punishment for letting the rune be stolen and essentially causing the Knight of Black Knives, he's forced to have the Rune of Death sealed in his blade and to a degree his very being. He was also charged with cleanup duty regarding the spread of the death root. Since it was decided that it was his fault the Night of the Black Knives happened, he was tasked with finding and consuming all of the death root wherever it appeared. This led to him forming some severe mental problems, as well as an order of hunters to assist him in reuniting the fragmented Rune of Death with its missing pieces that were found deep within the individual chunks of death root. I always think of Malekith as a goddamn tragedy. I mean, this poor dog, he was only ever loyal to his master. He was known as the bane of the demigods. He put down the Glomite Queen in her godskin uprising. He was nothing to scoff at. He did his duty faithfully and got nothing in return besides betrayal and lies. I feel like this is a very GRRM. It's even more fitting, if not a bit on the nose, that Malekith is a literal dogman, subservient to the bitter end, and even then his final moments, he spends them asking Marika if this is what it's like to sin. He's still just sat there wondering. He dies not knowing why any of this shit even happened and why he was used. It's also kind of heartbreaking when you think about how the beasts were only given this level of humanity, presumably on Marika's behalf, if that statue at Fair Missoula is supposed to depict Marika and some wolves. And as we know, the beastmen were given their intelligence in the form of opposable thumbs by the greater will. We don't know why they did this, but it's possible Marika wanted her servants uplifted, or maybe those three wolves are just the wolves in the spirit ashes. It's tough to say. But still, there was a time when these beasts, these dog-like wolf beasts, they didn't have the level of intelligence to question like why their existence was so meaningless, and maybe even just a grand joke like Malekith probably did. It's just sad to think about. We take dogs' loyalty for granted all the time, but Marika had just an extreme case of that. She was actively terrible to her pet dog. And I know the game refers to him as like her half-brother or her step-brother or something like that. She literally treated him like a dog by withholding crucial information, like a more messed up way of like how I would use treats to trick my dog to get into the bathtub for a bath. I think that might have sounded better in my head. But still, it's quite evident that Marika was horrible to Malekith. Now compare that to Ranni and Blythe's dynamic. Yeah, that's a whole different kind of tragedy, but Ranni seemed to at least genuinely care for her software malfunctioning stepbrother / pet dog. Yeah, it may not have turned out well for him in the end, but he remained loyal, and his fate definitely saddened Ranni, who does literally say that she loves him and Iji, so she's certainly capable of a level of compassion that Marika simply doesn't possess anymore. Now that I think about it, oftentimes Ranni does feel like sort of a mirror to Marika. She plots, schemes, breaks rules, and she also seems like the only one of the Empyreans to behave like a true successor to Marika, even if it's not in the way that she would want. It's not that surprising that one of the endings is Ranni winning. Shit, I think that still might be the most popular ending. I remember when the game first dropped, that was the most achieved ending out of the game. More people helped Ranni than even the basic Marika ending, so something to think about. I think they all just wanted the Moonlight Greatsword though, but we're going off on a tangent. Let's move on. So when it comes to whether or not Marika was impressed with the outcome of the Night of Black Knives, I'd have to say that I definitely doubt that she ever expected the assassins to kill all of the demigods because of her plans regarding the shattering for the other kids, but I do think she probably expected better results than she got. I think at the very least, she wanted all of the Empyreans dead. She knew that Ranni was up to something even if her Empyrean flesh was slain, and that's probably why the Black Knife assassins were watching her allies, waiting for the opportune moment to strike and hopefully get Ranni, or at the very least thwart whatever she was planning. In this instance, the Black Knife assassins seemed to operate as the hands of Queen Marika in the same way that the Knights Cavalry did for Morgoth. They were his eyes and ears, and his hands to strike out at people in the dark. Stopping Ranni's plans was probably the best outcome that the Black Knives could hope for, since, she wasn't corporeal anymore, so killing her was a bit complicated outside of the spirit-melting frenzy flame, and no one wanted to handle that shit, so Ranni's ghost would always have gotten away relatively clean, but they could still try to stop her plans. And now moving on to Melania, she was a problem whether she liked it or not. Not necessarily because she was an Empyrean, but because of the more obvious reasons. She was a ticking time bomb. She was predictable for now, but once she blooms the third time, Marika would probably have to 1v1 another goddess, which I imagine is no small thing. And on top of that, even if Melania never got to bloom that third time, she was still in service to perhaps Marika's biggest threat, Mikola. But perhaps I'm speaking too soon. Maybe Marika accounted for all of this by bringing back all the Tarnished with the express purpose of hunting the demigods. Seems to sort of make sense to me. I mean, it's entirely possible that Marika did intend for Godfrey to be her lord again because she believed he was the strongest and maybe even cared a bit about him, although that's definitely debatable. Now, personally, I imagine that as far as she was concerned, it didn't really matter who her lord was. If they were strong enough to make it that far, then icing Melania should be a piece of cake. Although I will say, I'm sure Godfrey could have pulled that off, no problem. Anyway, Mikola was arguably the most deadly of her potential replacements and had evaded her assassins using that nonsense liturgical town trap to contain all of them in. He then had gotten himself kidnapped by Mog, one of Marika's edgiest kids who happened to be involved with another star, the Blood Star, and he was making his own bid for a new dynasty following Marika's. She definitely didn't leave things on good terms there. Although I like to think that she knew Mikola's true plans when he allowed himself to be taken by Mog. I don't think that she feared an age of blood or anything like that. I don't think she thought Mog was going to successfully establish a new dynasty. I think she knew that Mikola was planning on using him to access the Shadow Realm and quite literally replace her as the new eternal god. I think Gideon the All-Knowing talks a little bit about this when you tell him of Mikola's cocoon's location. He even says we're probably better off if we just kill it or destroy it. Now, while Gideon himself ultimately dies a coward from misinterpreting the will of Marika, he does have the occasional good insight. He says that the queen's sorrow must have been justified in reference to finding Mikola's cocoon in Mog's bloody bedchamber, which surface level we're supposed to take as her being sad that her young son was kidnapped by the spurned son that she made live in the sewers, and sure, that's understandable, but I think her sorrow is more likely coming from the fact that she knows what Mikola is planning, and more importantly, that he's now outside of her reach. I mean, that must have been tough. Her crazy assassination plot failed to kill the child that she likely feared the most due to his ability to compel affection and his naive outlook on trying to fix the world with this forced love that he knew how to pull off. I think this small fact is the more likely source of her sorrow, especially considering that Marika was trapped within the Erd Tree by Radagon shortly after shattering the Elden Ring. Her biggest enemy was ultimately herself, or perhaps a part of her that was compartmentalized after witnessing the horrors of what became of her people. A part that was only allowed to resurface when she needed to be treacherous, like seducing Renala and presumably Granny Hornsent's son, at least judging by the old lady's remarks. This darker, sneakier side of Marika is what I believe became Radagon, and maybe it was exacerbated by the ascending into literal godhood. I mean, becoming a god can have some odd side effects in the writings of George R. R. Martin, and the games of Miyazaki, stuff that one mere mortal wouldn't expect or understand. In this case, some of the attributes of Marika that were long ignored sort of became the basis of another being, a soul, if you will, or another side of a soul, a shadow soul, maybe. It had long since been repressed, but it was there, hidden deep within Marika's very being, and this more rigid, order-focused persona would grow stronger and stronger the more she let it out, and it truly did have a mind of its own. It simply shared the body with Marika. And over time, the two just became constantly at odds with one another, each side vying for dominance over the other. That's why I believe Marika sought out a severance, if you will, in the form of shattering the Elden Ring and manipulating a bunch of Tarnished to show up and kill the Elden Beast, the living embodiment of order. Maybe the Elden Beast's influence on Radagon is what caused the two to be at odds constantly, but again, that's all just speculation. As always, there's no definitive answers here. I mean, I can only just speculate on what I, put together. As far as her endgame went, though, and despite Gideon's skewed interpretation, Marika's will was not for the Tarnished to fight each other eternally. She did genuinely want a lord, preferably someone like Godfrey if the man himself was no longer up to the task. When it came right down to it, Marika really didn't seem to care much which individual Tarnished became her lord, seeing as how she blessed the misbegotten blacksmith Hugh with the divine purpose of crafting a weapon capable of slaying a god. When you think about it, Hugh shared a similar curse as the last fire giant. The last fire giant was cursed to live forever and tend the flame, and there's really only one reason for that too. It was because she knew that she would need that flame one day. That's presumably why she kept Melina around. Melina, as a young child, bore a vision of fire, which was an ill omen to Marika's clan, but it was one that she knew she could use way down the road. It was sort of an essential part of Marika's grand scheme. In Hugh's case, his divine purpose was a bit more simple. All he had to do was improve a lucky Tarnished weapon to the point of god slaying and hope that the Tarnished killed a god. Until then, though, he was stuck in the pocket dimension of the Round Table Hold for presumably all eternity. Now, once Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she figured she'd already won. Radagon could try to repair it, but it was too late to fix completely. The demigod children and offspring all claimed pieces of it as their own on their bids to succeed Radagon. And that's exactly what she wanted. She didn't care if all of her kids died and became the ashes from which her new order rose. They served as suitable tests for her new lord, worthy sacrifices, as it were, to her new lord, whether it was Godfrey again or some other Tarnished. She wanted to do things right this time, and the only things capable of stopping her completely were Ranni and the demon known as Shabriri. Although that being said, the Dung Eater has probably the best form of revenge against her, if you ask me. I mean, basically making the world Hornsent again, but worse. Well, for Marika at least, because she would still be the eternal god in this new order. This one really ended up a little bit longer than I expected, so I'll probably wrap it up shortly. But one thing about Marika, one last thing about the Eternal Queen, is that she's filled with secrets, and this is one of those times where you just you simply can't let the mystery be. Much like Nora in The Leftovers or Cooper in Twin Peaks, we got to find answers or at least some kind of reasoning or explanations of why. Even if by design we'll never get a definitive answer anyway. And there's a lot of great mysteries revolving around Marika. What did she steal in the DLC trailer? Why was she two people? Where did the Newmans in general come from? How did she end up crucified and pierced by this curious looking spike? Now, some answers are in fact available. We know her goal was to become God again, a divine do-over sort of thing. We've been here before. Time is a flat circle, that whole spiel. And as for the current situation we see her in when we finally come face to face with the Eternal Queen is, she's impaled and crucified. And this was done by herself, or I guess Radagon, for shattering the Elden Ring. But her plan had already been set into motion. It was already too late to thwart it. She had, for the most part, outplayed Radagon and the Greater Will, but it cost her for lack of a better term, her mobility. She couldn't serve any type of active role in what was to come. But barring a lunar takeover or the literal burning of the world, she would have her win, and that's what makes Marika a Hall of Fame schemer among the FromSoft antagonists like Gwen in particular, the Lord of Light, or maybe Ishin from Sekiro. Personally, I'd say she's probably operating on a higher level than some of the other iconic schemers of these games, like Pontiff, Al, Nishandra, maybe even Aldia. I mean, all of these people are extremely competent and successful masterminds whose plots shape the game worlds that they take place in, but Gwyn and Marika are on a different playing field, which makes sense given that they're gods. They're on a separate level, a zone removed. So while Marika's plot left her crucified and crumbling, she still had a 50-50 shot of winning as far as the different endings go. 3 of them are in her favor and 3 of them not so much. So to say she had a guaranteed win is, a far cry from the truth. It was honestly all down to what could best be described as a cosmic coin toss. And again, I think the biggest way to spite Marika, if that is your inclination, would probably be to do the Dung Eater ending, the Age of the Curse Born. Give her an unending reminder of the Horn-Sent people and what she did to them and what was done to her people. But I'm pretty sure that's everything I wanted to cover this time around, although there's still probably some stuff I forgot to mention, but I guess that's the nature of things. But I believe that was everything I wanted to cover from my notes. Now, as always, I hope it was at least somewhat amusing or entertaining, and if you liked the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about the various lore topics and the occasional TV show or movie that catches my mind, please consider subscribing. We've got plenty of that, more to go. And if you feel like supporting the channel for any reason, I've got a Patreon that I hopefully will remember to link in the description. And I'm also setting up channel memberships because I know not everybody trusts Patreon for good reason. I mean, the less websites you trust, the better. But that's enough rambling. Let's have our outro and then the coveted final thoughts section. I should change this to the apologizing for delays section because, sorry about the long delay for this video. It sort of went an overhaul. It was originally just going to be about the black knives, but I wanted to talk also about Marika. I found myself inspired midway through making the black knife one that I just decided to make this a Marika's schemes video. Now, that doesn't mean that the Black Knives won't get their own shorter standalone video. Same with the Glowmite Queen, because I saw, there's still a good amount of arguments to be had about whether or not Melina is or isn't the Glowmite Queen, and that'd be fun to cover in a video. But I've also got that Prospect one coming. I've got there's also this video I've been wanting to finish up for like a year now about True Detective Season 2 and how it's often, maligned by many people, but I think that's a little unfair. It's actually, my favorite season. It's obviously far more flawed than Season 1, but there's just something about, the moods, Lyra Lynn's music. I could talk for days about it, and I need to finish up that video and see what, see what the feedback is. Because I think it's actually a pretty good season, and I think a lot of people are really starting to come around on it after how bad Season 4 was. Which sort of just remind me, Fargo Season 4 was absolutely awful too, so maybe it's something about cop anthologies in Season 4. Although with True Detective it was written and ran by a completely different person, and that was not the case for Fargo Season 4, so I guess what's Noah Hawley's excuse? Although one thing with Fargo Season 4 is it at least had a couple enjoyable performances. I don't think True Detective Season 4 had that, and yet somehow it's the highest rated season. At least on Rotten Tomatoes, which is another reason you shouldn't take all that shit too seriously. It's kind of insane how giddy all the critics were to take apart Nick Pizzolatto for Season 2 when it was actually a pretty solid season. I mean, again, that season gave us the Conway Twitty dream sequence that Colin Farrell had. That's one of the best scenes in all of True Detective. But I'm rambling here. Let's see what else do I got. And yeah, the whole final thoughts segment always sort of just devolves into me rambling what I have planned. Some videos that still haven't been finished. But I've found that it's a nice way to unwind after a particularly long video. Plus, I also like to think of it as my way of talking to the listeners because you guys rock. Now, moving on, what else do I have coming? One on Yellow Jackets, of course, and maybe one on Dexter Original Sin. Those are all the non-video game ones. Then I've got one on my favorite Legend of Zelda dungeon. I've got one on the Dark Souls 2 enemies. And a secret Dark Souls 3 video I've also been trying to finish up. In general, I've just been going over the previous Souls games again for footage, because there's a lot more video-worthy topics in those games that I've really been wanting to cover, from Demon Souls to Dark Souls 1, especially Dark Souls 2 and 3, as well as Bloodborne and Sekiro. I gotta go back through Bloodborne a couple more times for footage. And I finally got Sekiro on my PC, so I hopefully won't have any troubles getting the proper footage from that one, but I'll have to run through the game again. That stuff will be in the near future, of course. But there's a lot of topics in the previous FromSoft games that I've really been meaning to get to, and I finally got the time to. I'll probably be taking a break from the Elden Ring and general stuff, but I won't be taking any form of break from software game coverage. It'll just be moved over to, like I said, one of the previous titles. So as always, a lot of good stuff, and I do have more free time now to finish them, so let's hope I can pull off another quick succession of videos, because I always feel really satisfied with myself after that. But no one really cares about about all that. Let me know what you guys think about the whole Marika situation in the comments, because again, your insights often are they help me shape these theories. So I always like hearing what you guys got to say. I'll hopefully be back very soon, probably with I don't know, it could be one of those two videos I mentioned, the Black Knife or the Glow-Eyed Queen, or it could be a Legend of Zelda video. We will have to wait and see. But until then, I hope everybody stays safe and is well. And until then, see ya.